And actually, since we're talking about both of these valves, it's really just in the ventricle. That's what I should be writing. Is that better?
Yeah.
Better? That's weird. All right, thanks. All right, and what's kind of unique about this one is because the pressure would builds up so high in the ventricles, you have to have something that keeps it closed. Because otherwise, as the pressure built up in here, you'd keep pushing on that valve, and it's going to open back into the atrium. Now the blood's going to go backwards, which would be bad. So that's where those chorda tendina come in. And they're attached to papillary muscles, which are attached to the heart muscle itself. So whenever the ventricle contracts, it pulls on those muscles, which pulls on the chorda tendina, which holds the valve closed. Because they come, which I can draw on there. Well, you see them in this picture in a minute, but they're special. They come from here to the valve. So from the walls of the ventricle to the edges of the valve. So it keeps it from doing this. So contracted. I can never remember how to spell that. So when the valves open, those muscles are relaxed, just hanging out there. And those the valves open because there's low pressure. High pressure closes it. And then as the heart contracts more, you pull on these little strings to keep it from opening the wrong direction. And you can actually see the chorda tendina really well when you dissect it. They're a lot bigger than you'd think. It's like you open up the ventricle and they're all over the place. And you could see there's the valve, and you could see the little chorda tendina attached to it. It's weird. It's like it's having trouble showing the correct video. I guess the computer's not fast enough to show it. Here's a more detailed video. Hopefully this one will work better. All right, so we won't watch this whole thing. It's got some good stuff in it.
Let's take a look first at the anatomy of the mitral valve and how it functions.
So this is true. Basically, it's the same thing for mitral and tricuspid, and the same function.
The mitral valve facilitates movement of blood between the left atrium and left ventricle of the heart. Anatomically, it is located between the left atrium and left ventricle, as shown here.
And you can see the aortic valve right there on the other side of the ventricle. So each ventricle has two
During
valves.
the relaxation phase of the left ventricle, also known as diastole, the mitral valve opens, permitting flow of blood from the left atrium into the left ventricle. This action allows refilling of the left ventricle with blood in preparation for the next contraction. During the contraction phase of the left ventricle, also known as systole, the mitral valve closes, preventing backflow of blood into the left atrium and facilitating the ejection of blood from the left ventricle into the aorta and the systemic circulation. And so, with each heartbeat, the valve opens and closes as part of the cardiac cycle, thousands of times a day. The mitral valve is composed of two flaps, or leaflets. The leaflets are composed of a very flexible material. In yet another example of the body's amazing design, papillary muscles are attached to the inner wall of the left ventricle, and then to the leaflets of the mitral valve. During systole, the papillary muscles contract, preventing ballooning or prolapse of the mitral valve leaflets into the left atrium. Viewing the valve from above, we can see the two leaflets, anterior at the bottom and posterior at the top. From a functional point of view, each leaflet is further subdivided into several segments corresponding to the attachment of.
We don't need to know all the rest of that. Any mitral or tricuspid questions? All right, so let's look at the next one. That's the semilunar valves, also called the aortic or pulmonary valves. And they make sure the blood goes one direction out of the ventricles and not back in. And different than our mitral valve, there's no chorda tendina, there's no papillary muscles. They function a little bit differently. Any ideas what might make these valves open?
Low pressure.
Well, where are these valves again?
Leaving the ventricle.
It's between the ventricle and the artery. What would make them open?
High pressure.
In the ventricle? What closes them? So it's basically the opposite. What keeps it closed? Is there anything that keeps it closed? Nothing really. It's not like there's something it has to fight against. It's just if there's low pressure in the ventricle, it kind of closes. That's its automatic state. And it kind of makes sense because it's up at the top, right? So if it's high pressure, it opens, and when the pressure subsides, it just closes. Kind of like a door with a spring on it. If you're not pushing on it, it's closed. That's how those valves are. And so if you notice, this means, do you ever have all the valves open at the same time? That would be bad. So instead, it's open these, open those valves, and then close them and open these valves. So it's kind of a two-step thing. Right. Lots of videos for these.
Something cool?
Oh no. I can't watch those movies. They're too scary.
The aortic valve is located between the left ventricle and the aorta. When the heart contracts, the aortic valve opens and blood is pumped into the aorta. When the heart relaxes, it closes to prevent blood from leaking back into the left ventricle. A normal aortic valve has 3 smooth cusps that open widely and close tightly. Your aortic valve may be leaky or narrowed, causing your heart to work harder and disrupt your blood flow.
Right? So let's say it doesn't close all the way. Now what happens?
Blood back in the ventricle.
What do you think that would do to you?
Could maybe throw off the mitral valve.
Taking it back the next could be a problem. Are you going to be pumping as much blood to your body? Right? And so as you'll see later, like maybe the heart's going to have to pump, create it more pressure to get the same amount of blood out, or beat faster or something, which is not all that good for the heart to do. Where's that one? All right. Let's try this one. So that's semilunar is another name for these two. All right, looks like you could use some discussion. We haven't had one as spread out as that in a while. So C and F are 2 winners so far. C's not true. They're located between the ventricles and the arteries. So if you've got your table, maybe you want to add where it is, perhaps, or maybe you already know that. So the answer is F. Right? They're located between the ventricles and the arteries. And they open, when do they open? High pressure in the ventricle. So there's lots wrong with E there. And nothing else is true. There are 3 flaps, not 2. All right, and as I mentioned before, you don't have all 4 open at once. Instead, each pair opens at the same time. Like mitral and tricuspid open, and then they close, and the aortic and pulmonary open. You can see that up there. So you've got mitral and tricuspid open, and then they close, and pulmonary and aortic open because of the pressure. For you to listen to the rest of it at home, or we can listen to this whole thing here. You could be famous too. You make your own video like this.
Right atrium that enters through the vena cava. It flows down through the tricuspid valve. It won't go back up. Stays in right ventricle until it contracts. Yeah, it's pumped up to the conus arteriosus, pulmonary, semilunar valve into the trunk. Yeah. And every time it goes out through your arteries, I say, hey, that's pulmonary circulation. It goes into the lungs and back into your heart. The left.
You got some more? Yeah, nah. Is that enough? This is one of those songs you could like torture people with. After I get done with all my singing lessons, or my voice lessons, I'll make some more videos like that. Much better though.
Want me to bring in a guitar? We could do the cover of that.
We could totally do that. It would be awesome. Then we'll go over to Ebenezer and perform it for him. We'll be famous. That's something I have to do is do, like community outreach. It's part of my job, so that would count. Who's got heart problems out there? Ross and I have a song for you. It'll be fun. We'll be taking applications for backup singers. Soon. All right, let's see. What's 4? I think 4 is when valves are broken or something. Right, what it says on there. Make sure you read the question all the way. So it says which valve is damaged, and you have to say what's wrong with it. If you're stuck, maybe this will help the picture a little bit. Why it's not making a slideshow? Where'd that go? There it goes. So think about the path of blood, where it's getting stuck. All right, so I'll just make each group tell me one answer. And for some of these, there may be more than one right answer. So if you have something different, feel free to ask if that's possible. So we'll start over here with Ross's group. Slowed blood flow through the pulmonary artery. What's the answer?
The pulmonary valve does not open all the way.
Yeah, I think that makes the most sense. I don't think there's really any other answers for that one. All right, group number 2 here. Increased blood volume in the left ventricle after contraction. What'd y'all say? Um, yeah, so I think the way it's written, probably the best answer is the aortic valve isn't closing all the way. So if it doesn't close all the way, it pumps blood and it comes back in. And I guess in a roundabout way, if this valve was broken, it could. But I think I'd probably write something like the left atrium is getting blood going back into it or something for time of the valve being broken.
If you talk about mitral.
Yeah. If it was on the test and you explained yourself, it wouldn't be wrong.
Because the mitral valve, it does it cause a line with blood copy to the ventricle? Do? Also causing it to fall?
Didn't close all the way. Well, I think if it didn't close all the way, blood would be being pumped out into the atrium when it contracts. Because when it's relaxed, it's open anyways. All right, so next group, what did y'all say for high blood pressure in the pulmonary vein? It's probably the hardest one on there.
I put the pulmonary valve to close all the way.
I would actually say it's nothing to do with the pulmonary valve itself. Because the pulmonary valve goes into the artery, which goes to the lungs and the capillaries. I know, this one's tricky for sure. So for that one, it's actually backing up from here, from the left ventricle, from the left atrium. So you've got your pulmonary vein coming in. What did I say on there? There's high blood pressure in it. That means something wrong here. So the mitral valve isn't opening all the way.
So it's going back.
Yeah, so the blood's coming in, it's not getting through here, so you're building up pressure all the way back to that vein. So the mitral valve isn't opening as much as it should. So the blood flow's kind of messed up that way. Now, if it said something about high blood pressure or low blood pressure in the pulmonary artery, then you'd be talking about the pulmonary valve. All right, and then our group in the back there, blood is being pumped into the vena cava. It is the tricuspid valve. And the answer is you're right, it doesn't close all the way. Because the blood is supposed to come from the vena cava into the atrium to the ventricle and out, not the other way. So if it's going out this way, that must mean this valve doesn't close all the way. Because the blood's supposed to go out of the pulmonary valve, not out that direction to the vena cava. And the last one, slow blood flow into the left atrium. You think they know that one? Yeah? So that one's hard because you had to go all the way back, right? Blood's not getting into the left atrium, so you got to follow it back, and then you'd eventually get to that pulmonary valve. And I would say there's like other conditions that could cause those problems, probably, like some lung problem or whatever, but we're focused on valves for now. And of course, this is something really common, like genetic defect, developmental defect. Everybody's probably heard of like infants getting heart surgeries, probably. So it's common for any of those issues to happen. And they're pretty easy to fix because it's mostly connective tissue, so you can put an artificial valve, trim it. Mm-hmm.
Say you have a murmur, what really is that?
So when you're saying a murmur is you actually hear the blood flowing in the wrong direction.
The wrong direction.
Or too fast or too slow.
Okay, so it's really technically not anything to do with the valve or anything.
No, it would be, because otherwise
It's
the
either
blood,
opening or closing or something.
right. Because you can hear like, Yeah.
The same thing as like a murmur?
I mean, I've never actually done this, but with the stethoscope, you can hear those valves opening and closing. I'm sure I'll do that eventually. And then you could also hear if like the whooshing is different somehow. You have to ask one of the nursing people to give you more details on that. But that's what the murmur is something weird. The valves.
On my daily assessment
Uh-huh.
that we do on the heart, you just listen to it and is the apical heart rate regular or irregular?
That's it.
For like a nursing perspective on a general
Yeah.
assessment.
You're not listening for murmurs or something.
Not, I mean, you gotta do it on like 20 people and
Yeah.
also every other bodily function, so.
Yeah. And in general, that's not something that just like appears out of nowhere. Like it's either your valves are perfect or something's wrong with one of them. It's not like you'll just all of a sudden go check on somebody and they have a murmur out of nowhere.
And usually like when somebody has congestive heart failure,
Yeah.
and their heart is worked up with fluid and stuff,
Mhm.
that actually builds up into your veins.
Mhm.
And you can see it when it just bends. That's what the cardiologists use. to
Yeah.
know that your heart failure is.
Yeah, so definitely. So when you're in heart failure, it means these ventricles aren't pumping enough blood to the body. And if they're not pumping enough into those systemic capillaries, then there's not enough pressure to get it back to the atrium, and you get like edema and fluid buildup. And you're right, the veins end up with too much blood in it. So like this vena cava would have extra, be stretched out, and all the veins going into it be stretched out too. All right. Should we watch that song again? Y'all need some extra help? Here's what we're gonna do. Next time, if every one of you can't tell me the order of the blood flow, I'm gonna make y'all all watch the whole song over and over again. It's punishment. All right, where's that picture? All right, so that left ventricle, it's full of high oxygen blood, right? The chamber. So why does it need its own coronary arteries and capillaries running around it and into it? Well, it's full of oxygen already, right? Why can't it just get oxygen from inside the chamber? What? What doesn't work that well? Well, why not? Do it. Well, your heart needs some, though, too. Any ideas?
It's gotta take it to the cellular level. Maybe it doesn't absorb it as easy through the walls of the heart.
That's almost there. See, let's draw ourselves a heart here. Is the heart wall pretty thick? Okay, so let's say this is the chamber, and this is the wall. Do you think oxygen diffuses really quickly and easily? So if all you had was this blood in here, I better use red, that would make more sense. Only this very tiny layer right here would get oxygen. And then all these cells would die. So instead, as soon as you pump it out of the aorta over here, there's little arteries that come off of here. And there's some that go over here. And then it's just going to branch out into tiny capillaries all over. So you can get that blood to the heart muscle. So I think a lot of times people get confused with heart attacks. What you're blocking is one of these small arteries that directly goes to the ventricle itself. You're not blocking blood flow out of the heart, which I think is sometimes what people think. So you've got them in here, and let's say this one gets clogged up. No, this part of the heart's going to die if it doesn't get opened up quickly, because it has cutting off blood flow to that part. All right, and you can see it graphed on there. See some of the larger arteries in red and the veins in blue there. And you can't quite tell, but it's coming off the aorta, kind of right. There's the aorta. It's coming off the bottom of it, and going through that way. Where do you think the veins go? So they collect the low oxygen blood. And where is it going to end up going to? What structure? Not the pulmonary vein. Where does your low oxygen blood go to?
Right into
Right before that?
the vena cava.
Yeah, it goes to the vena cava first. So these veins are attached to the vena cava to join all the other blood from the rest of the body. And it kind of makes sense. Obviously, your heart's pretty important. So the body basically, the first major artery that comes off with good blood in it goes right to the heart. So maybe your fingers and your toes don't get enough, but at least your heart will get oxygen first. All right, that's it for part 1. Glad we have extra time for this. So what about the study guide then for part 2? I just had it. There it is.
Yeah. B. Yeah, I could find B.
B, so the electrical conduction system. I'm going to show you a little picture of that one. Oh, what was D? Yeah. So here's the steps. So it's depolarization, plateau, and repolarization. For D.
Wait, what was it?
The list, the steps, and cardiac action potential propagation.
Okay. Oh.
Depolarization, plateau, and repolarization. And it just said list, so you don't even have to describe them. And then the electrical conduction system of the heart is basically the order of where the signal to contract starts and what it goes through. So it starts at the SA node, which makes the right atrium contract, and then it goes to the AV node, and then it goes to the AV bundle, then the bundle branches, and finally the Purkinje fibers.
So do you want to know like that, or
Mhm.
just like, because like in the rough one, talking more details.
Yeah.
So, like I have like 2 sentences per thing. Do you want to know that kind of stuff, or just that?
Just that, the order of it. And I guess knowing that it's not like a neuron, it's signals traveling directly through cardiac cells, like muscle cells. Like action potential, which is like ions going through one cell after the other. But mainly the order, because we're going to talk more about that later. No, so the SA node's the pacemaker, because it's first.
Can I ask you one later on, or does that just be only the
Just do the bold ones for now. Let's take a little quiz then. All right, so which of these is the volume ejected from the left ventricle in 1 minute? Heart rate, stroke volume, cardiac output, cardiac reserve. It's cardiac output. So always confuses people. What's the stroke volume? It's the volume per beat. Stroke volume is how much blood comes out in 1 beat. Cardiac output, how many in a minute? Or how much in a minute? So to get it, it's just heart rate times stroke volume is cardiac output. So it's like, not plus, time. And the reason we have that, the term cardiac output or use it, is because what matters to your body is how much oxygen it gets. And it makes a lot more sense to measure it as how much blood's leaving every minute. Because if you just looked at stroke volume, that doesn't tell you how many times it's beating. So it wouldn't give you an accurate idea of how much oxygen is getting delivered. So that's why you need both of those together, which is why you use the output. Let's see, which of the following sends out the first signal for contraction? It's the SA node. Say thanks, Michelle. So you asked about the pacemaker. And which of these is not a step in extrapotential propagation? Polarization, plateau, and repolarization. It's all of them. Which means contraction. Systole. Diastole is relaxation. And what's an inotropic agent? Changes heart rate, kills heart cells, or changes contractility. It makes it, changes the contractility, not the heart rate. So that was C for that one. So just as another reminder, if you're not getting 4s and 5s on those quizzes, you need to change something about how you're getting ready for class. Because that means you're not getting it. It makes it harder once you're here. So flashcards, simplifying it. If you ever want to show me what your notes, what you're writing for stuff before class or after, I'm happy to look at it. Because usually what happens is people write way too much. They're writing like 8 sentences for something that could be like 1 sentence. So anyways, all right, part 2, electrical stuff. Trying to keep this a little simple, so you could go into crazy detail on it if you wanted to. But you remember, hopefully, from 201, if you're talking about neurons, are they usually negative or positive inside your neurons? They're usually negatively charged inside. Your heart cells are the same. They're negatively charged. And when they're negatively charged, they're not contracting. If they become more positive, that's when they contract. That's what an action potential is. Just like traveling down a neuron, it's traveling through muscle cells. So depolarization, that's when positive ions come in, the cell gets positive, and then there's this long period of a plateau where it stays positive, and that's when it's contracting. So the cell got shorter because the myosin and the actin. Hopefully that sounds sort of familiar from 201. And then repolarization just means it's getting rid of the positive ions and becoming negative again and waiting to contract again. And this wave, because you think of it as a wave, it starts at the SA node. And because all your cells are connected together, all the heart cells, with gap junctions, those ions can flow from one cell to the next and cause depolarization, make it positive, make it contract. And so it starts at the SA node, it makes the atrium contract, and also the left atrium contract. And then it goes to the AV node, and it just spreads through the bundle branches through both of the ventricles. And if you notice, the last one to get activated is those Purkinje fibers, which are connected to the chorda tendina. So right when you're starting to squeeze the ventricle, before too much pressure builds up, those fibers get activated to hold that valve closed. Which is kind of interesting because that's how it makes sure that you're pulling on those little strings at the right time. You just put it at the end of those signals. All right, so one kind of interesting thing, the SA node has what's called autorhythmic fibers. And that means they automatically depolarize. They get to that trigger to depolarize without any external input. It's not like your brain sends a signal to your heart, hey, time to contract. The heart actually does it on its own, which is why you could actually take a heart out and keep it supplied with blood or whatever, and it'll keep beating, even if it's not attached to your body, which is kind of crazy. And that's because that SA node, you can see the time here, every like 0.8 seconds, it automatically reaches threshold, opens channels, lets ions in, and it starts that whole contraction. And that's because it slowly lets in positive ions. They're just always open, so you make it negative, and you slowly letting positive ions in, you get to that threshold, which just means now it lets more positive ions in super fast. And then you repolarize, but then those channels are open, so it slowly lets those ions in until you get positive enough to trigger the contraction. So it's just automatic. That's what we're talking about when we're saying autorhythmic fibers. What happens if you get some damage to that SA node from like a heart attack or something? Could end up with a pacemaker, although before that, the AV node actually also is autorhythmic. And in fact, everything on this list is autorhythmic, just at a slower rate. So if this SA node fails, your heart's still going to beat, just not quite as fast. And maybe the AV node's kind of enough to keep you going, or maybe it's not, and then you need like a pacemaker, which is just a device that basically takes over what the SA node does, and it kind of zaps it, starts the depolarization. And if you're talking about, does anyone have had arrhythmias or know anybody with a heart arrhythmia? So that's where some portion of this isn't working correctly. So maybe the bundle of His, for some reason, is sending out its own signals before it gets it from the SA node. And so you can imagine how well would the heart work if the atria and the ventricle contracted at the same time? Like not very well, right? So it has to be timed kind of perfectly.
So if they say like your baby's born with like a heart,
Yeah. I mean, I guess they have a hole in their heart, like in the wall here. So they just go sew it up.
The ventricles, right? It's swooshing and mixing and oxygenated.
Oh yeah, like right here. That'll be in the RV. Yeah. Do I?
I didn't know it was an actual hole.
I mean, it's probably not enormous, because if it was enormous, that baby wouldn't have been able to develop, you know. But if it's just a small one, it's not like deadly right away, right? They can just go in and fix it. Huh? Yeah. So like her brain cells didn't get enough oxygen her whole life. Yeah, that'll be a problem. Yeah, and it's crazy how they'll discover, because you know, as a kid, like, how many people have had like an echo done of their heart? Yeah, but there's a reason for it, right? It's not just like a standard thing they do to everybody. It's like both my parents found out they had like slight valve problems when they were like 50, you know, because no one ever looked. And I might have some. Who knows? You might have some. Did they find anything for yours?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's when I had a malfunction.
Okay. Oh, right, because you had an arrhythmia. Yeah. So if they could tell like which of these fibers are being stupid, they can like go in and burn them and kill those fibers to get rid of that inappropriate signal. It works pretty well usually, because you've got all these other ones that are functioning correctly. I don't know how they know exactly which ones are the bad ones, but pretty cool. Right, so I just wanted to show. It wouldn't be the heart without an EKG on here. You don't have to know everything on here. Just to be able to tell what part of an EKG is atrial contraction, ventricle contraction, and relaxation. And so, obviously, EKGs are used mostly to see how your heart's working in terms of the electrical system. Like, is the signal for ventricle contraction coming at the correct distance after the signal for atrial contraction? So when you're looking at it, you're coming in, everything's relaxed, and this P goes up like that. That's when that first pacemaker fires and the atria contract. That's that signal. So it's kind of highlighted in blue up here. Of course, what contracts next is the ventricle. So this QRS crazy thing here is the electrical signature of the ventricle depolarizing. And then the T, and all the way to the next P, is the relaxation part, where everything's kind of relaxed, everything's repolarizing and waiting for the next beat. So this would just repeat itself over and over again, every heartbeat. And so if someone, if they had a heart attack, this will look different. If they got an arrhythmia, it'll look different.
What'd you say S2 was? What's the?
So basically everything from Q to like here is ventricle contraction. Well, I guess to like there. Everything after T, or like the top of T, is relaxation, where atria and ventricles are filling back up before they contract. So that's that thing on the study guide about describe the events of an EKG or an ECG. It's just to be able to label this atrial ventricle relaxation. Goes on test or something. Well, it's happened to me before where I make some modification to the study guide and then accidentally post the old one from last semester or something. But you do have this, right?
Yeah.
Okay. No more messing with me today.
Sorry.
You just want to make me confused. All right, so let's see if we can combine some things you learned all together. So think about EKGs and valves. So you're going to have to think about lots of things at once. All right. So we'll have a talk to your group then. Remind you where PQ is. So it's atrial contraction, right? Because it's PQ. So which valves are open when the atrium are contracting? It's the mitral and the tricuspid. So I could have also, if I asked you what valves are open during this ST part, that's when the ventricles are contracting. So which valves are open? Right. And I think for this chapter especially, it's seems really confusing, and then you kind of figure it out, and then everything makes sense. So just keep trying, keep thinking, and you will get there. But the problem is, nothing makes sense till you get all of it. Once you get how it all works, then it all makes sense. And until that, it's doesn't make any sense. I think this is probably a good stopping point. We're not going to be able to finish this whole section right away. So yeah, we'll just stop. We'll do the rest of this next time.